next presenter, Emilda Rivers, who is the head of the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics at NSF. And I will mention too, Emilda is part of the podcast of the 4 agency heads that we talked about yesterday. That's in the issue. But today she's going to be talking about an article she co-authored, searching for how data have been used, intuitive labels for data search and discovery. So Emilda, I turn it over to you. Don't forget to unmute.
So thank you so much, Nancy, and special thanks to the Harvard Data Science Review for gathering us here and for all of the people who are participating. I'm learning too what it means to be not the first author, and these are the responsibilities. So I get the chance to talk with you about some exciting work that we're doing, and it is also exciting to be a part of the Fabulous Four in terms of the agencies that have contributed to the Democratizing Data project. So as we think about searching for how data have been used, intuitive labels for data search and discovery, we understand that data access, use, and reuse are foundational to both empirical science and evidence-based policymaking. That foundation depends on having data labels so that 2 key contributors to the data ecosystem, the users and the producers, can search for and discover data. And that's what I'll talk with you about today. So I'm going to go over just a little bit about NCSES, and you've heard before yesterday, if you were able to attend, you heard some about the Democratizing Data Pilot Initiative. I'll talk about that. Searching and labeling for data discovery, common classification frameworks to generate intuitive labels, and then future considerations. So NCSES and the Democratizing Data Initiative. Many of you may not be aware that NCSES is the statistical agency that provides data for key insights into the science and engineering enterprise, often in a global context. What that means is that we actually produce or sponsor over 16 national surveys to collect our data. We also go out to data users, other providers of data, government agencies, both domestic, so in the US, and international, to provide information on our science and engineering workforce, the US STEM education, research and development, government funding for S&E, higher ed, and R&D. I'm hoping what I'm painting for you here is a picture of the need for us to pull lots of data from lots of different sources together and able to speak about the science and engineering enterprise. And so NCSES does have a democratizing data dashboard. And with this dashboard, we're able to understand more about who our data users are, because this is a very big question for us. What is the return on investment for some of these efforts in terms of the data sources themselves, their accessibility, and how we're able to link them? And so we can know how they're being used in the research community by looking at things like publications and journals. We can know things like, are we broadening participation of the use of the data by looking at institutions and institution types, and also by authors. So there's a wealth of information that the Democratizing Data Dashboard is able to provide for us here at NCSES. But what we also understand is that a key, very key to understanding data usage is having robust metadata. And as has been mentioned a couple of times now, the Evidence Act authorizes agencies to promote evidence building with federal data. It really has given us the authorization to do things that I think some of us that are data geeks have been doing forever, which is trying to figure out how to make sure that we have a good proposition around our data and the need to go out to the public to gather that data and then to disseminate it. And so what is required for us to be effective? We have to produce statistics on how our products are being used. This is about meeting needs, research needs, policy needs. And then we want to be able to find and apply use of restricted data assets I could talk forever about the standard application process. That's not why we're here, but I will tell you that you can go there to get restricted data assets across the federal statistical system. And then we want to be able to identify information gaps for data providers and users using salient labels. So what we know is that agents' metadata are essential, but there's a challenge within the federal data ecosystem. We also know that agencies prioritize resources toward high quality data, and it's often at the expense of use of utility. These are some of the decisions that we have to make. And we know that there's no government-wide common standards or ontologies to characterize data. Therefore, we do know that we need good metadata to support data usage statistics. So for the democratizing data pilot, the NCSES provided a case study really trying to investigate the creation of intuitive labels that align with the agency mission areas and emerging technologies. I think you heard Nick talking about this before. Is we have this mission and we have these areas, and how do we make sure that we have data that's being used and aligning with that? So we tested 3 approaches in this pilot use case: all science journal classification, a science metrics classification, and NCSES taxonomy of disciplines. What I want to just say up front is that these approaches were insufficient in identifying NCSES data usage in emerging technologies and our mission areas. So I'll start up front there. Now, if only it were easy, right? If only we had a system similar to the labels that we provide that we see on food, because if you have the cans with no labels, well, you're not going to quite get to the meal that you see here. And it's the same similar concept with metadata and being sure that we have those type of labels that users and producers can search and discover data for. So when we think about these labels, then they are critical for decision making. You can't even imagine going into the grocery store and not seeing any labels on your cans of food. So I'm going to follow me, please, with this analogy. I'm going to use it a bit here to talk about the metadata labels: promote transparency, discoverability, and governance. That's kind of how you understand when you go in your grocery store, how you understand and store your ingredients. And then facilitate data access and data use. You want to take those products and actually retrieve some ingredients to cook your meal. Same thing with the data. And then enable reproducibility, which is you have this wonderful meal. Now you need to store the recipe for future use. And this really is the analogy that I think prevails as we think about metadata labels and how critical they are. So I want to cover somewhat quickly and invite you then to enjoy the journal in terms of some of the articles that are there that relate to this on the common classification frameworks to generate intuitive data labels. I'm going to run through a couple of approaches. So there's the publisher approach, where publishers and research analysts have developed journal and publication level taxonomies. And several of us are familiar with that. A key to this is, how does this then align with the mission of the agencies? I'll continue to say that as we think about these. And then the publisher approach, we create ontologies that serve a different function that label data sets to organize and grow a corpus of scientific literature. The question then is, how do you map metadata on authors and subjects to agency missions and research areas? And then there's the Federal Statistical Agency approach, where research classification mappings are typically agency specific. And while we have government-wide classification systems, then we have to take those and map them to our particular missions at our agencies, such as at the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, where we're focusing on science and engineering and the disciplines that support that. So there's a rule base, to create classifications through manual or machine learning methods. This is where we are. So what we understand then is that there's no commonly accepted federal standard for mapping data sets to either agency missions or research areas. I continue to mention this point. And then there's the community-driven approach. Here we see that we classify labeled data sets by how they are used by researchers and their use of common terms to describe the work they're doing. Now, the published works that use the federal data can be analyzed and grouped to signal information about a topic. And that's very important. And then you create those classification systems based on these topics. And you use a people-based framework based on evolving terminologies and topics across fields over time. So you have those approaches. Now let's see, where does that take us in terms of a labeling approach for the search and discovery platform? So for NCSCS, and you think about this, machine learning to create the labels can have this approach too, where you conceptualize technical areas as research fields and emphasize points of similarity. You classify these data sets into different mission areas or research fields using the terms by the publications in which they are found and by the authors who do research in these specific areas. And what this does is to provide a solid basis for designing, training, validating, and explaining a classification model to generate labels. So artificial intelligence as an example topic. Here, we can include terms that are closely related to AI and people working in AI. And the advantage is that the most common terms that AI researchers use can change rapidly while the people doing the work are more consistent. So what does all of this mean in terms of where we are now and what are some of our future considerations? Creating useful metadata for a democratizing data platform requires consistent attention. I almost want to repeat that, but I know I don't have much time. The people in areas of research will change over time. Therefore, the taxonomies need to be flexible. And we know that some of our taxonomies that are government-wide, they're updated every 10 years or so. We need a little bit more flexibility in our systems. And then how do we map those to our agency missions and some of the emerging areas of interest? We also know there is no one-size-fits-all approach to developing data set labels. So what we really are looking at here are what are the emerging research technologies that push us to consider a search approach that uses people and terms to label fields instead of an approach based solely on terms. We have to use the people and the terms. What does a future agenda look like? Well, it's the use of natural language processing, semantic analysis, and machine learning for a variety of use cases. And that's really where we're hoping that this discussion today, that this webinar is going to encourage you, it's going to be the impetus for some great ideas that you might have on use cases that then could be used in things such as a national secure data service that the NCSCS is doing as a demonstration project about how to have shared services across the government. And so we want to develop these different sets of metadata topic labels for different needs. And again, this is where we look and involve the communities at all stages. And hopefully we hear from you in terms of ideas for use cases. Thank you.